Welcome back to the class. We are continuing with the discussion about the social context in which a discipline like sociology emerged. We are talking about the great transformations that happened in Europe in the 18th and 19th century. We discussed about the intellectual transformations, we discussed about the political transformations in the previous class with the rise of nation state and the French Revolution. And in today's class, we are going to discuss what were the major transformations that happened in the economic front, or how did the economy underwent substantial and comprehensive changes in Europe during this particular time. Because we know that economy, the way in which economy is organized, the distinct character of economic activity, which can be, which are usually classified, at least in the Marxian sense, as primitive communism or feudalism or slavery or capitalism or socialism. So these modes are extremely important because they not only their relevance is not only confined to the realm of economic activity, but they spill over to other fields of social life, into economic, into cultural, into social spheres of life. So it is extremely important to understand that what were the larger transformations, what were the kind of revolutions that happened in the sphere of economy in Europe during this particular time. And we know that as that has been the case all through these European transformations, the rise of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution, though it originated in Europe, it began to spread across the globe immediately after that, basically through the process of colonialism. So in this class, we are going to examine these two important aspects, the rise of capitalism and Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, with machine labor gradually replacing hand labor, originated in Great Britain in the late 1700s and then spread to Western Europe and the United States. So we know that in the previous class we discussed about scientific discoveries. We discussed about Copernicus, we discussed about Charles Darwin, we discussed about Galileo Galilei, and we discussed about how a series of scientific discoveries completely undermined the religious explanation about the universe. These scientific revolutions were not only restricted in the realm of ideas, but they also had very specific practical immediate consequences, because it was transformed as a kind of a technological innovations. So a series of technological innovations took place during this particular time, or the centuries just preceding to that. The discovery of electricity, the discovery of steam engine, and a series of scientific discoveries and technological innovations completely began to transform the technological and economic scenario of Europe, and most importantly in Britain after this 1700. And that immediately spread across Europe and to America, and then to the rest of the society. We know that even India's own experience in terms of technological advancements, whether it is telegraph or postal or telecommunications or railways or a host of other technological innovations or technological expansions, happened in India only because of colonial rule. Whether that was for their own convenience and for their own efficiency, that's a different question. But the previous colonies began to experience the fruits of technological innovation basically through the process of colonialism. So the Industrial Revolution initiated an outpouring of continuous scientific and technological innovations and continuous improvements in the methods of production. Once the process of industrialization got underway, as Eric Hobsbawm writes, change became the norm. So we are witnessing to a particular phase in history where the rate of these innovations become so high that this particular phase cannot be compared with any of these preceding centuries, where the rate of changes or the rate of innovations were much slower or much lower. So you are witnessing a 2 or 3 centuries, 18th, 19th and 20th century, or maybe 16th, 17th and 18th century, where a series of scientific innovations began to appear with very long lasting influences. So that is why it is leading to an outpouring of continuous scientific and technological innovation. So, innovation does not come and then stop, it actually becomes a continuous set of innovations, a host of scholars and scientists working across the countries, and day by day they are bringing in new technologies which are becoming more and more efficient, and thereby replacing the kind of a traditional technology where human labor and animal labor were the most important source of power. Whether it is in terms of industrial activities or in terms of agricultural activities, this human labor and animal labor were swiftly replaced by this machine labor, and continuous improvement in the methods of production. So, this technological innovations had a very specific bearing on the economic activities, on these methods of production. And once the process of industrialization got underway, Eric Hobsbawm writes, change became the norm. So, you are no longer in a society which is more or less static. You are no longer in a society where change is very gradual and very slow. You are in a society which is changing rapidly. You are in a society which is witnessing unprecedented kind of transformation, a transformation of a much higher level in every aspect of life, but in this particular context the change is brought in by technological innovations. In the previous class, I hope you remember, we discussed about the changes that happened in the intellectual realms in terms of the ideologies, changes that were brought in the political realm, but here these changes we are talking with a reference to the kind of changes in technological and economic spheres of the society. So, the new technological innovations and inventions, emergence of new domestic and overseas markets, and above all the role of colonialism, a point that I have been reiterating several times. The new domestic market emerges with the rise of factory system, with the rise of an industrial class, with the rise of a capitalist class. A domestic market emerges with more ability to spend, and more importantly, new overseas markets emerge during this particular time through the process of colonialism. We know that how big this issue was in our freedom struggle, that led Mahatma Gandhi to launch this whole argument of this whole movement of Swadeshi movement, because India was one of the most important markets for Britain. India was also a place for them to procure raw materials, and these raw materials were taken to London, taken to Britain, from where they were converted into finished products. They were brought back to India and sold at a much higher price, thereby completely breaking the traditional industrial system in India, and also reaping so much of very high economic rewards, very high economic profit in this entire production, in this entire process, So, the kind of a connection between the rise of capitalism and the kind of a process of colonialism is very strong, and we need to understand these larger transformations not only as the triumph of science and technology, but also the triumph of systematic exploitation through the process of colonialism. So the scenario, the kind of developments are much complicated rather than a black and white situation. So, these changes, as students of sociology, we are more interested to understand the implications or the consequences of these technological changes, the changes that happened in terms of science and technology, leading to more efficient forms of production, not only in the economic sphere, but also or more predominantly in the social sphere. How did these changes influence the social sphere of Europe? And it basically led to the decline of agrarian rural life and the rise of industrial urban societies. There are two things. We are talking about changes from an agrarian rural life to that of an industrial urban societies. So, it is not only the transition from rural societies to urban societies, but also a transformation from an agrarian society to an industrial society. And as you know, these are very different types of social organizations, very different types of social organization in every sense of the word. Not only in terms of the kind of predominant economic activity, but a host of socio-cultural and political aspects that come along with that. So, this feudal tradition based economic transactions were replaced by market oriented contractual relations. A feudal society is characterized more by conventions, more by traditions, more by kind of an economic transactions that have been influenced by the kind of very close networks, close kinship, close ties, ethnic ties. They were gradually but significantly replaced by more market oriented and contractual relations, where these ethnic affiliations, your conventional ties, so your social ties became less significant, not completely irrelevant. Even now, even in the modern capitalist system, these ties are important, but they became less significant. And business transactions happened mostly through a kind of a modern contractual relations. And a new culture based on individualism, competitive struggle for wealth, and a secular worldview gave people a strong sense that they were living in a new era of constant change. A host of consequences of these changes. A new culture based on individualism, the rise of the individual, the staple food for sociological thought. We will discuss how the rise of the individual is some of the most important aspects of sociological studies. And we discussed in the previous class the emergence of the social. Along with the emergence of the social, the rise of the individual as an independent person, as a more free agent, not as a part of a wider collectivity or not as a part of a wider community. So, this transformation of the individual as an independent free agent who can think on her own terms, who is not completely bound by the traditional rules, who is very free, who has agential power, who is empowered, and that was something very, very distinct. And a competitive struggle for wealth. We discussed how capitalism emerged, which opened up or which completely destroyed the existing social hierarchical system, existing social stratification system based on landed few and landless majority. So, the land became less an important site for economic competition, and industries and then factories became the new sites for these competitions. And a secular worldview, we discussed it several times. This was the process of rapid phase of secularization, where the influence of religion began to decline. Religion was pushed to the private sphere. Religion was disentangled from other domains of social life. Influence of religion on law was curtailed. Influence of religion on political life was curtailed. Influence of religion on education was curtailed. So, you have more and more spheres emerge as free or autonomous from the influence of religion, and this is an extremely important element of the process of secularization. We will come back to secularization more in detail when we discuss Max Weber, but I just want to highlight this point. Secularization is not only that the number of people who go to church or mosque or temple are coming down. It is also a very important delimitation of the relevance of religion in what is understood as the public sphere, in the public matters. Religion is seen as, of course, one of the important institutions, but its relevance, its ambit is very specifically restricted. It is very seriously restricted, and its relation or its dominance to a large extent, it influences to a large extent to other realms like family, law, politics, entertainment, and a host of other things are very significantly curtailed. So, a new secular worldview emerged, and that gave people a strong sense that they were living in an era of constant change. And the fundamental changes in the social bonding between people, the decline of kinship, religion and joint family system, and the rise of individualism, the same point. Because we know that in an agrarian rural setting, the people in villages or in rural areas, which is mostly defined by agrarian activities, the kind of social relationship is very different. It is usually defined as face-to-face interaction. Everybody knows each other. Everybody knows each other's family for the past so many generations. Everybody knows each other's caste and family history and everything. You are seen as a member of a particular family. You are seen as a member of a particular community or a religion. And that very intimate kind of social relationship, the kind of a social bonding was completely replaced. It was disrupted, because in an urban situation you are seen as an individual. The kind of relationship that exists in an urban setting is qualitatively very, very different. It is not face to face, it is not very strong. Of course, you will have very strong set of relationships, but people generally do not know or do not identify you as belonging to a particular family, particular community. They do not know the history of your life. People are more or less anonymous. You may not even know who are living next to you. So that led to the kind of and also of course the decline of joint family, because there is a very interesting connection between the rise of industrialization in Europe and the rise of nuclear families, because the capitalism wanted able-bodied people, especially able-bodied men who are available for their work. So there was large-scale migration, which we are going to discuss now. There was large-scale migration from rural areas, leaving mostly the parents back and coming alone or maybe with their wife and children. So the rise of nuclear families and the decline of joint families and the decline of influence of religion, they all played a very important role in the rise of individualism, rise of individual as autonomous entities. So the large scale migration of population to urban areas, there are very fascinating statistics about how large scale migration happened across Europe in very short span of time, how the population of big cities increased manifold, and the rapid growth of cities which brought in a series of problems and challenges, because it was unplanned completely, it was unregulated completely, because it happened as a consequence of a sudden economic transformation. So that led to the proliferation of slums, poor housing and sanitary conditions. The people's life became quite chaotic. There was quite a lot of issues in terms of living together in unhygienic conditions, with very bad infrastructural facilities. So there was a series of social issues emerged as a result of this large and unregulated migration of people who left behind the traditional feudal society and then moved towards the urban cities, which were seen as the modern industrial new world. So Karl Polanyi, one of the very important intellectuals, he describes it as, at the heart of the industrial revolution of the 18th century, there was an almost miraculous improvement in the tools of production, which was accompanied by a catastrophic dislocation of the lives of common people. So these two things happen simultaneously. On the one side, there is a miraculous improvement of tools of production. As we discussed earlier, the human power and the animal power was dismissed and it was replaced by machine power, which was far more effective, which was far more efficient in terms of productivity, and it was accompanied by, at the same time, catastrophic dislocation of the lives of common people. So this dislocation is not only a spatial dislocation. It's not only that people were displaced from the rural areas into urban areas. These are also dislocations in the lives of the people in every sense of the word, in their cultural understanding, in their traditional ways of living, in the quality of social bonds that they used to develop, the kind of an orientation that they used to develop. So it was a complete transformation, and he is using the word catastrophic because the consequences were very significant. So that is why we will come back to this kind of characterizations as catastrophic, because most of the social scientists, including the people whom we are going to discuss in the coming classes, found these changes as very disturbing, because the social order which they were familiar with, characterized by a very lethargic, slow life of the traditional societies, were completely replaced by very unpredictable, fast changing, tumultuous social life, which had a series of negative consequences, which had catastrophic effects of the common people. So, the rise of the factory as the most important site of economic activity and economic production. It does not mean that the agriculture declined, but the factory emerges as the most important site of economic activity, and the division between private sphere of domestic work and the public sphere of factory and employment. Another very important point which can be easily connected with the later theorizations about the emergence of public sphere, the distinction between public and private. Your household being always synonymous with your private life, and the public life being synonymous with your with your factory, your place of employment, the place of your entertainment, the place of your reading, intellectual discussions and other things. So, this is yet another very important aspect, especially the rise of factory, which we will discuss. So, in the factory you have the kind of a central surveillance of the workforce and better control. It is a regimented life and the tyranny of the cloak. So, what does it mean? A transition from a feudal agrarian life into that of a modern factory life. How did the labor force, or how did the labor class experience this change? And that was tremendous. The labor class, the working class experienced these changes as very, very significant, because they were always under surveillance. There was no physical threat, there was no physical punishment, unlike the feudal thing. The power equations were completely changed, but because of the rationale of the economic system in which they were entangled, they were completely under central surveillance, and they were forced to work more. They were constantly under surveillance, they were constantly under supervision, they were forced to work more, and it was a regimented life. So, what does it mean to be a regimented life? And also connecting with this point of tyranny of the cloak, because now the life is regimented, the life is divided into very specific rigid schedules. For example, the siren, the sound of the siren in the factories emerged as a very, very important factor in every laborer's life. The idea of the work begins with the siren in the morning, and then when the siren sounds again, it is a time for them to stop the work, and they are not supposed to stop the work in between. And then there is very specific time, maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes, for them to have food, their lunch, whether they are hungry or they are not hungry, or whether they were hungry earlier. All these things do not matter. This is a time for you to have food, and you have food within 20 or 30 minutes, and then when the siren sounds again, you again get back to your work. And at the end of the day, maybe after 10 hours or 12 hours, when the siren sounds again, you must stop your work and then get back to your home. So, this was completely a different lifestyle for quite a lot of people, because in feudal societies this kind of very stark difference between the work and the life was not this acute. This kind of a demarcation was not very strong. So, here the life became more regimented. There was this all pervasive influence of the siren and the cloak, which brought in so much of changes in the everyday life of ordinary people. As the industrial economy displaced agrarian economy, wealth in the form of landed property declined in importance relative to the wealth in the forms of industrial capital, buildings, factories and machinery. Another very important transformation, because before the industrial revolution, it was the land that is the most valued. Land was the site of economic activity. Agriculture was the most important form of economic activity. Labor had to take place in this agricultural field, and there was a decline of this agricultural land as the site of economic activity, and on the other hand, the buildings and the factories and the machinery became the important forms of capital. Land of course continued, but it was no longer the most important form of capital, but the form of capital was a set of new ideas, buildings and huge factories and the kind of machineries which can enhance the production process. And of course, a series of issues associated with exploitation of workers and resistance. We will touch upon this point maybe later when we discuss Karl Marx, because Karl Marx, as you know, was a historian. He was an intellectual who devoted his entire life for analyzing this whole question of labor and working class in the capitalist era. So this transformation resulted in systematic, brutal exploitation of workers and the resultant resistance, many times in the form of successful revolutions, and many often not so successful workers' resistance, which was kind of negotiated or defeated many times. So the Industrial Revolution resulted in the triumph of modern capitalism, but on the other side it also gave birth to capitalism's chief adversary, the modern socialist movement. And till the fall of Berlin Wall, socialism represented as a very important model of competition for the capitalist system. And throughout 19th and 20th century, socialism was a very important alternative. It was seen as an important alternative for capitalist economic system. Now, this Industrial Revolution, it not only gave birth to capitalism's, gave birth to the triumph of modern capitalism, but also the modern socialist movement, the working class movement. The ideas of Karl Marx, the ideas of socialism became very powerful during this particular time, leading to a series of unrest, workers' unrest across the industrial societies, because it was only through these workers' unrest and agitations that they were able to get better benefits from the capitalist class, whether it is better remuneration or better living conditions or better other kind of facilities from the working class. It was only through these constant struggles and constant strikes and movements that they were able to improve their life. So the end of the feudalism and the rise of working class comprising of free independent agents who can sell his or her labor. So now the labor emerges as an independent agent who can sell his labor. For example, in the previous system of slavery, where you become a property of your master, you are a property of your master, where the master can sell you, you can buy new properties, you can dispose of, and into a feudalism where your dependency over the feudal lord was much more stronger. From there you become as an autonomous independent agent who can sell your labor. We conclude this session with a very famous passage, or at least a couple of sentences from Karl Marx and Engels from their very famous book, The Communist Manifesto, where they say, all fixed fast frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinion are swept away. All new formed ones became antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned. Very beautiful sentence, which actually captures the kind of magnitude as well as the depth of the transformation that was happening. So he is saying that all new formed ones became antiquated before they can ossify. Before something becomes like crystallized, they became antiquated. Even the new one becomes old very, very fast. And all with the venerable prejudices and opinion are swept away. The whole aspects of tradition, with all fixed and fast frozen relations with the train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinion are swept away. And all that is solid melts into air. And all that is holy is profaned. Beautiful sentence. All that was considered to be holy, all that was considered to be unquestionable, all that considered to be divinely ordained are now profaned. They are brought back to the ground. They are questioned. They are profaned, and they are taken out. All the holy aspects of them are taken out. They are made very, very ordinary things. And this passage is very, very powerful, which really captures the mood of this kind of larger transformations happening in Europe during this particular time. So, as we discussed in the previous class, the kind of a large scale transformations happened in the realm of economy, where the kind of social change underwent significant changes was yet another factor that played a very important role in the rise of sociology as a distinct social science. We will conclude now and we will meet you for the next class. Thank you.